I want to welcome everybody to the Parrot Club's June 2026 meeting. I'm Amy Hopkins, president of the club. And tonight we're very pleased to welcome Dr. Alexander Ruebenstahl from the Peabody Museum. Dr. Ruebenstahl just defended his dissertation. And about a year ago, he gave us a tour of the fossils in the Peabody. And we're very happy to have him back in tonight to talk about the evolution of the avian respiration. And Alex is a vertebrate paleontologist. He completed his master's and bachelor's at George Washington University. His current work focuses on the evolution of early crocodilians and bird-like dinosaurs and major anatomical structures of the reptile skull. He's published papers on the construction of the crocodilian skull and the origins of the avian wrist, named new species of meat-eating dinosaurs, with more in the works, and carried out field work in the U.S., South Africa, Lesotho, and China. And with that, and with our congratulations for your recent defense of your dissertation, I want to turn it over to Alex.
Hi, everyone. I guess good evening at 7 o'clock. And I'm excited to be here. I see some familiar faces when I scrolled through everyone earlier. And I'm going to share my screen so we can see the slides. What do we see? Do we just see a single intro slide?
Yes, we have the cover slide.
Okay, fantastic. Well, yeah, so I'm going to talk about the evolution of breathing in birds. This is more of an overview talk with some interesting and exciting threads we can pull on. Oh, I guess I don't know if you can see the little me, but I just found a little alligator skull in my desk. That's funny. Okay, sorry. So yes, let's talk about the evolution of breathing in birds. And as just a heads up, I do have some images of sterile dissection in here. So if that, I'm going to try to remember where they are. There aren't a lot. They're mostly digitally rendered anatomy where possible. So no gore, but you're going to see some lungs. So let's get started. One of the big realizations and discoveries of the last 30 to 40 years of dinosaur paleontology is that dinosaurs are active, warm-blooded animals closely related to birds. One of those important lines of evidence that links dinosaurs to birds is their respiration. I'm not going to spoil how we know this right now because, that's the fun of the talk, but I just want to set the stage with that. So even back, 1993, even back, I know this was before I was born, but old to me. We had this idea of active, hot-blooded dinosaurs. And this is one of my favorite little clips of the original Jurassic Park where it's fogging up the glass because it's exhaling hot air. So before we get into bird breathing, let's just talk about breathing generally. Why do we breathe? Well, every animal and many microorganisms that can't produce energy by absorbing sunlight, so photosynthesis, need oxygen to turn glucose into energy, ATP. If you're a tiny little single cell, you can do this by simply diffusing oxygen across a cell membrane. As you get into more complicated animals, different animals devise structures to pull oxygen out of the air and water. So in a lot of aquatic groups, there are gills. And in insects, they have a strange little circulatory system. They don't really have veins. They have fluid that fills kind of these tubes on their body. They absorb oxygen through holes on the bottom of their thorax and abdomen, which is what we're seeing here. But once you get into vertebrates, animals with backbones, you either have gills or lungs. So gills, how a gill functions is oxygenated water passes over the gills and the gills passively absorb that oxygen into the bloodstream so it can be used in the functioning of organs. Pretty normal. The kind of strange feathery appearance of a lung is a solution to a surface area problem. To make a structure more efficient, to get as much oxygen as you can out of the water or air, and we'll get into the air, It helps to have more surface area. So one way to increase surface area is to get bigger, but the more efficient way to increase surface area is to get complicated. So lots of little branches and folds. And this is mirrored in our own lungs. If you've ever seen the interior structure of a lung, it looks kind of strange and spongy. And that's all extra area for the absorption of oxygen. So as we move up through fish, we get our early lung. And what's actually quite surprising is that lungs show up before we leave the water. So many primitive groups of fish, things like arowanas and other large freshwater fish, actually have functional lungs. There are some fish that can drown if you don't allow them to breathe air. And part of this reason is because freshwater is relatively oxygen poor compared to saltwater and the air itself. But this is around the time we start to get a sac attached to the stomach that you breathe in and oxygen is diffused through. Breathing in salamanders and frogs and animals that can't lay eggs is pretty similar to fish with lungs. Once we get to animals that are spending most of their time on dry land, however, mammals and reptiles, we begin to see exciting modifications in how we breathe. So all mammals have what is called tidal respiration. Think of the tide. The breath comes in and out. When you inhale, the diaphragm, a big muscle, is pulling down on your lungs and the viscera around your abdominal cavity, around your heart and lungs. And that's making space. Air is flowing in. And when you exhale, stale air is released. Nothing left in the lungs. You have to inhale again. This kind of tidal respiration is also similar to what happens in many snakes, most lizards, and that'll be important, and turtles. But birds, as far as living groups of animals go, and living groups of reptiles in particular, do something really incredible. There was an arrow. They have something called unidirectional airflow. Unlike mammals, they have a series of additional pockets that branch off of the lung. We call these air sacs, and we're going to call these air sacs for the rest of the talk. Functionally, what this lung allows birds to do is constantly have oxygen-rich air in their lung. And we're going to get a little bit more into how exactly this functions in a second, but this is a nice little animation. The general consensus on why this emerged, at least previously, was because flight is demanding. If you want to fly, it's one of the most metabolically intensive things an animal can do. So it helps to have as much oxygen as possible. Now, bats, they breathe like us, but they still fly. But they're not as good at it. There aren't really continental soaring bats or anything like that. Bats have a more limited range of flight than birds do. But that's the traditional line of thought. Birds have a lot of adaptations to their skeleton to facilitate the special lung. They have big bony sternums, and that's what they kind of use to press against the lung to change its shape so air flows in. Alligators, the closest living relatives to birds, right? Dinosaurs, birds are dinosaurs, but as far as living relatives go, the closest we can get are alligators. They have these smooth lungs that are pulled up and down their body, much like ours are, whereas birds have fixed lungs that are squished into the ribs. That's why they have to deform it with their sternum. And here we have a nice little stripped away image of an ostrich. And this is important to internalize because we're going to return to this a few times as a thought. So the lung is in blue and everything else are air sacs. The air sacs are enormous. They fill most of the body cavity of the bird, kind of around the outside of the major organ systems. The air sacs don't invade organs. They're attached to the lungs, but it's just lungs, air sacs, and then the air sacs attached to the bones, specifically the vertebra. Come on. There we go. They send these little kind of thin, fragile tissue that dig into the bone like a sinus, like the sinuses of your face are excavated. I'm sorry, the bones of your face are excavated by the sinus. Same idea in the backbones of birds. We call these holes pleurocoels, and these help to hold the air sacs in place. They're not exchanging gas, they're not pumping. The air sacs pump, but they don't absorb oxygen. Only the lung is absorbing oxygen. So let's get into how this actually works before we go any further. So when a bird inhales, like us, it's breathing in fresh air that goes to the lung. However, in addition to going to the lung, that fresh air passes into a posterior or caudal air sac. At the same time, air that's already in the lung is passing into a different air sac or a different series of sacs, these cranial air sacs. So this is the stale air. Now the bird exhales. That fresh air that was being stored in that air sac moves into the lung. So now there's still oxygenated air in that lung. And the stale air moves out of the cranial air sac and out of the bird. This is really cool. This is essentially, as long as the bird is constantly keeping oxygen that is constantly being diffused into its bloodstream, right? This is something we can't do when we exhale. We have no other way to absorb oxygen. And this kind of adaptation lets birds do incredible things. Flying, midair acrobatics. This is I think a falcon kicking a poor pelican out of the air. They are unprecedented in the animal kingdom. And it's not just breathing that makes air sacs so incredible. They lighten the skeleton, which helps with flight. And this is one of our dissections. A recent discovery by Emma Schachner down in Florida, she discovered that the big inflated air sacs also give leverage to the flight muscles in a lot of birds. So they're an additional thing for the muscles of the wings to extend over and increase the efficiency and power of the flight stroke. So really fantastic structures. There are downsides. Nothing is perfect. Everything has a trade-off. The air sacs of birds also make them very susceptible to injury and infection. Now, sometimes when people discuss this, they'll mention the canary in the coal mine. And the story is usually, oh, birds breathe so efficiently. You bring one down into a coal mine, it breathes in poison. Its respiratory system's more efficient. It dies before the miners. That's the trick to know, uh-oh, got to get out of here. Or it's at least shows some distress. I am not sure if this is true. I think it might be because the canary is just small and the toxins accumulate more quickly in a small animal. I'm not sure if anyone has ever checked to see if this is true with a mouse. But that example aside, when those air sacs get infected or are affected in another way, it's very serious because those spaces are attached directly to the lung. So injuries to the air sacs or infection to the air sacs are usually fatal in birds. So this is a kind of infection that can come from bacteria or fungus to those air sacs around the around the body and neck in early chicks. I'm not a veterinarian. I'm not sure how this is treated, but we're going to return to this a little later. So, right, this air sac is inflated. It's not exiting in the way it's supposed to. And this is why single bite wounds from cats and other predators are often so dangerous for birds. Even a glancing strike or what looks like it shouldn't be fatal can pierce air sacs in the arm or lower body that then become infected or fill with blood. So the structures, incredible benefits, but they also make birds quite fragile. This is all, and why birds are hunted with small shot as well. The trick is the same, which is I find very sad, but some people enjoy the sport. Not my place to judge. Okay, so we have this is our aggregate understanding of the avian lung. Efficient structure developed from sacs that attach to the lung. Pros and cons. But where's it coming from? How are we getting there? So we're going to bring it a little bit back, and we're going to talk about other reptiles for a second. Now, I mentioned earlier that the kind of flow through the lung that we see in birds is called unidirectional airflow. This kind of airflow is actually present in some other living reptiles. So this is a savanna monitor lizard. This is one of the more active monitor lizards, and when we look at their metabolisms, they actually run a little hotter than a lot of other lizards. And they have complex lungs. These aren't air sacs. They don't attach to the skeleton, but they're little pockets that come off the lung. They're called parabronchi. And they effectively create a similar, if less efficient, loop. So there's a little bit of unidirectional airflow in the lung of lizards like this. And this is how we think those air sacs on bird lungs are evolving in theory, emerging from the lungs. Slightly more closely related to birds, we also see these structures in alligators. So alligators and crocodiles have a limited unidirectional airflow as well because of these complex lungs, but not air sacs. And this is interesting because modern alligators and crocodiles are kind of slowpokes. They'll run if they have to, but they live a nice and easy life. I'm frankly envious of them. They sit all day in the water and really only move quickly if they're hungry, which sounds like an ideal experience. But this unidirectional airflow is maybe indicative of a active ancestry. So if you were on the tour with me, I probably talked a lot about ancient crocodilians. But this unidirectional airflow is another little piece in what we consider evidence that ancient crocodilians were more active. They include kind of leggy, greyhound-looking species, herbivores, terrestrial species, fully marine species. They all, unfortunately, have gone extinct by now, but they appear to have inherited this active, this more efficient lung. And this fits with other evidence of high activity in crocodilians. This includes a four-chambered heart, birds and mammals, warm-blooded, four-chambered hearts, crocodiles, only reptiles with four-chambered hearts. Modern ones are cold-blooded, but we have evidence from their histology that, again, suggests they were relatively active animals. They do not breathe like birds, though. This is not a perfect kind of stepwise acquisition. They actually breathe much more like mammals. They have these big muscles that attach to the liver and the hip, and it pulls the liver back, which pulls the lung back effectively, and the lung fills up with air, a diaphragm functionally. Birds do not have a diaphragm. They rock their lungs with their big bony sternums. Okay, so maybe air sacs are coming from outpocketings of the lung, but where do we actually begin to see evidence of air sacs? It's not just in birds. Well, we need to talk about archosaurs. So archosaurs are the group of reptiles that includes crocodilians, flying reptiles like pterosaurs, which are not dinosaurs, and then, of course, the dinosaurs themselves, ornithischian dinosaurs. These are things like Triceratops, Stegosaurus, sauropod dinosaurs, things like Brontosaurus, and then predatory theropod dinosaurs, which include things like Tyrannosaurus rex, and of course, all living birds. So who's got air sacs? Oh, and this is the tightening of relationships. So which members of these different archosaur groups have air sacs? Which ones are active? This is a little hint. Maybe it's the theropods. Bird-like anatomy has long been found in theropod dinosaurs. This goes back several decades, but there's been, as we said earlier, this emerging trend in understanding that many dinosaurs were way more bird-like than we previously appreciated, and birds are more reptile-like than we've previously appreciated. For example, some flightless birds have claws that still grow on their arms or wings. All theropod meat-eating dinosaurs have wishbones, a feature of a fusion of the clavicles, which is only present in birds and meat-eating dinosaurs. And if you've seen a bird foot, it's covered in big, weird scales, which is not something mammals do. It's really only a reptile feature. Of course, the obvious and most exciting link between these two groups are the feathers we've found on more recent fossils, which are incredible and really make the case quite compelling. But there is, of course, the lung link as well. So as we said before, those air sacs, they attach to the vertebra, the backbones, and they do that with these little holes. So this is an ostrich vertebra. We can see the little holes in. And back in the 1920s, paleontologists looked at dinosaur vertebra and saw holes in them, specifically meat-eating dinosaur vertebrae. But the idea was like, oh, maybe these are adaptations for weight reduction, which they could be as well. But they do have the characteristic holes and openings on the side. Again, not anything we see in any other group of reptiles. So as this idea of birds having descended or being dinosaurs began in the 60s, but really caught on in the 90s, this evidence of an air sac was reevaluated and is now generally accepted that we begin to see the origins of this ventilation, at least in meat-eating dinosaurs. But it goes further. Of these groups of archosaurs we discussed before, crocodilians, no air sacs, no evidence of it. We have living ones, they don't have anything like it. But we have found evidence of air sacs. Oh, out of order. Also not in ornithischians, not in Triceratops, not in Stegosaurus, which is interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more about later. But they're present in pterosaurs, which aren't dinosaurs, sauropod dinosaurs, and as suspected and noted for a long time, meat-eating dinosaurs and birds. So what does this tell? What can we infer about the history of this structure from this? Well, a kind of classic, and I don't want to say simple, but a classic approach to this. We have vertebrate with those holes, like I said, in pterosaurs, long-necked dinosaurs like sauropods, and meat-eating dinosaurs. This would suggest that an air sac, here is the little orange shape, is either showing up in the common ancestor of long-necked dinosaurs and theropods, separately in pterosaurs, or is present in the common ancestor of pterosaurs and all dinosaurs, but is then lost in ornithischian dinosaurs. And this is not an unreasonable inference, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is in a second. But this is the general kind of classic idea on how these structures are evolving. I say classic, it's maybe like 15 years old, but if you ask someone, this is probably what they'll tell you. There's a small problem with this that's only become evident in the last 3 or 4 years, though. The earliest relatives of pterosaurs, this cute little guy called Legurpiton, which is not flying, climbing trees, their vertebrae are not as holy. They're not as full of air. They're kind of solid structures. The really air-filled vertebrae, these are cross-sections of them, so all the white space you're seeing are the spaces inside the vertebra. Those very air-filled vertebrae are really only seen in the later gigantic flying pterosaurs. So that's interesting. The same issue extends into long-necked dinosaurs and meat-eating dinosaurs. The earliest relatives of both of these groups, animals alive in the Triassic like this Eoraptor, they have very dense vertebrae. They don't have excavations by these air sac. So this means we might have to reconsider the evolution of these air sacs. Maybe they're evolving multiple times. So independently in pterosaurs, sauropods, and meat-eating dinosaurs. Now, personally, I don't like invoking multiple evolutionary events of something unless we have very strong evidence or a really dense sample. And an important thing to know about the dinosaur fossil record is it's not very dense. There are great spots in lots of different areas, but we probably have less than 1% of dinosaur species described. So we could be missing a lot of really interesting variation. What could be happening is that the air sac is present primitively in all groups, but does not invade the skeleton until you get into more advanced pterosaurs, sauropods, and theropods. And we have a reason to think, we're not totally sure, but there's a reason to think that this could be possible. A lot of marine birds, birds that dive or fish, like cormorants, frigate birds, I think pelicans, some pelicans, they have air sacs, but they do not carve out the vertebra. They don't make holes because it's important for ballast. Those birds have denser bones. It helps them dive and swim. So you can have air sacs without having the openings in your vertebra. Openings in the vertebra, 100% ding, 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 you've got air sacs. But frustratingly, absence of the holes does not necessarily mean absence of air sacs. And this is something that really is very difficult to resolve, although I know of a paper that might help, but I can't say anything about it because it's not out yet. So So what's the point? Why you have animals that are evolving these air sacs maybe quite early in the Triassic, pterosaurs and all these dinosaurs show up in the Triassic. We know air sacs are extremely helpful in living birds for flight, but a lot of these early animals aren't flying. Those early Lagirapitids weren't flying. Um, no sauropod is flying, and most meat-eating dinosaurs don't fly. A popular hypothesis, and one that I think may have some merit to it, is that the efficient avian lung that evolves in dinosaurs, maybe just so they're more metabolically active, they are capable of being more energy efficient, helps them to survive one of Earth's big mass extinctions. This mass extinction we called the Permo-Triassic. I'm sorry, pardon me, the Triassic Jurassic. I got all confused. At the very end of the Triassic period, there is this enormous climactic disaster. It's called the Carnian pluvial episode. It radically alters many habitats on Earth, huge amounts of flooding. We think it may be caused by volcanic activity, but the jury is still out. It's one of these ones where we're not like asteroid, very, very obvious. Asteroid did that. This one, not totally sure. We just know that there's a huge die-off. Most of those ancient crocodilians that used to dominate the Triassic period don't make it, but dinosaurs do really well. And then at the beginning of the Jurassic, they explode into all the different groups that we're familiar with, stegosaurs, brontosaurs, etc. So this could be because of their more efficient respiration. It could be related to the fact that they evolve simple feathering. Maybe that's a body temperature regulation skill, or both, or something we have no idea about. This is the nature of the fossil record. But this is an interesting point of comparison. So maybe it's breathing that helps dinosaurs take over. That's the short history of these structures. I want to take just a little second to talk about some of the groups more specifically and some fun thoughts and experiment studies that have been done on air sacs in dinosaurs. So first, let's talk about those dinosaurs that don't have any air sacs. These are the ornithischians. Again, hadrosaurs, stegosaurus, ankylosaurus, triceratops, etc. Recent work has discovered that many members of this group have an attachment on their hip bone for a big muscle, very much like the one present in alligators, which suggests that these dinosaurs are separately and independently evolving a diaphragm like crocodilians and like us. This would be a problem if you had air sacs. If you're pulling your lung backwards, what you're going to do is rip those air sacs to pieces. So it may be, and this is again maybe, that early ornithischians say we don't need air sacs. We're going to breathe differently. Why this would happen, I couldn't tell you. The early record of ornithischians is only just starting to be filled in, so there's more to learn. But these guys are the exception. In pterosaurs, oh yeah, backward, moving to the Triceratops. I added a lot more to this PowerPoint last night than I remember. Pterosaurs, air sacs make plenty of sense. They hollow the skeleton. The biggest pterosaur, a pterosaur with a 20-foot wingspan, weighs maybe 60 pounds. They're incredibly lightweight. So the air sacs help with that. And of course, the story here is similar to birds. If you're a flying reptile, air sacs appear to be a must. No flying reptiles don't have air sacs, or at least pleurocoels. So the story for pterosaurs makes sense. In sauropods, gigantic long-necked dinosaurs, all herbivores, we have tons of complex holes in the vertebra. The purpose here seems to be mostly for weight reduction. If you are, the weight of 10 to 20 African elephants, it's not the worst thing in the world for your skeleton to at least be a little lightweight. Increased respiratory efficiency might also be helping these animals reach such giant sizes. It's noteworthy that no mammals ever reached the body size of sauropod dinosaurs. And no ornithischians, none of those other, no Triceratops relatives or hadrosaur relatives are reaching that enormous body size as well. So maybe this is the trick. This is the key to truly gigantic size in sauropod dinosaurs. We're talking about animals that can get to 120 feet long, the largest land animals ever. Not, they're bigger things in the ocean, but land. Something that's kind of really cool about sauropod air sacs too is that they're one of the only examples we have in the fossil record of an air sac infection. There is what we call paleopathology, or just simply pathology, but evidence of an infection in the spaces in the vertebra for those air sacs that is not dissimilar to that kind of infected air sac disease. It's more of a catch-all term for any kind of infection to the air sacs that affects living birds. So it's kind of, to me, incredible to think that a small chick and an adult diplodocus, some 90 feet long, were suffering from a similar condition separated by 150 million years. He's got a little cold. Just think that's a fun image. This is also, and now I'm going to talk about a popular dinosaur documentary. This is Prehistoric Planet. And in it, they have a depiction of one of these gigantic sauropod dinosaurs called Dreadnoughtus. And in this section, it's quite fun. They have these balloons along its neck as a kind of display. And I don't like being a buzzkill, but for the reasons that we previously discussed, in that these air sacs are very fragile and prone to infection, it is unlikely that they would ever extrude from the body like this, even for display. It's more likely in living birds too. Display structures, inflatable display structures on the throat are not linked to the air sacs in the neck. They're related to kind of these gular folds and pouches. The neck air sacs, you don't want to mess with them. They exist to facilitate air, and that's about it. Having them outside the body, if you pop one of those, that's a disaster. So that's my take on this scene. No one has to take it as gospel, but I think it's unlikely given what we know. Lastly, we have our meat-eating dinosaurs. These are the theropods that include birds. Birds inherit their air sacs, at least from theropods. And I'm going to now step out. I'm going to step out on a bit of a limb here and talk about a hypothesis I have that is basically impossible to test, but I think is a little interesting. And it's related to cockfighting, a horrible sport. But if you've ever seen images, and this is not even cockfighting, of any flightless birds fighting, birds will always hold their head, neck, and body away from the legs. Part of this is balance, but as we talked about before, a single kick, a single piercing injury is terrible, is disastrous for a bird. And this was something one of my committee members and I spoke about once, which was one of my favorite fossils in the world is the fighting Protoceratops and Velociraptor. This is usually interpreted as a rather ambitious Velociraptor attempting to eat an animal larger than itself, Protoceratops. And the fossil preserves the animals in combat. It's incredible. But what's striking to me about the Velociraptor, Protoceratops is one of those ornithischian dinosaurs. It doesn't have air sacs. But the Velociraptor, fighting for its life on the bottom, is clutching the head of the Protoceratops with its clawed hands. I've driven in little blue circles. Those are where the air sacs of the body would be. And it's got its foot under its neck. And usually this is interpreted as like, oh, it's trying to stab the throat of this poor Protoceratops. And my thought was, what if it's just trying to keep itself away from this very angry Protoceratops, right? It can maybe afford to take a bite on the arm or leg, but it's got to keep its very delicate, soft, and relatively fragile air sacs and skeleton away from this Protoceratops, which means business. In this sense, not a particularly clever girl. This Velociraptor bit off a little bit more than it could chew. And this is, again, my friendly PSA reminder that Velociraptors are in fact, quite small and charming little animals, although I've been chased by a goose before, so I'm sure if I saw a Velociraptor that didn't like me, I would run the other way, no matter how tall it is. So this kind of brings us to the end of avian respiration. We've covered how the avian lung works, what it allows birds to do. a spotty history of how it evolved and a few fun case studies. I'd like to, if we have time, do we have time? Someone not, Amy. Okay, cool. To talk very briefly about some published work I have on the wrists of birds. So we're going to kind of skip to a few slides here, but these are slides which are, what else do we need to know? What is there to learn about the evolution of the air sacs? The answer is quite a bit. We don't know, for example, if the number of holes in a vertebrae correlates to how efficiently birds breathe. This is something someone could study. I would like to get to it at some point. We would probably be best served by looking at birds that are incredibly efficient breathers, things that pass over the Himalayas, and see if they have larger or more numerous holes in their vertebra. But that's a study for another stage of my career. I want to talk to you guys about wrists in birds, which is something I recently published on with a friend of mine, James Napoli. So we're going to talk about the pisiform. The wrists of birds are very important to flight, and the wrist bones in bird arms are one of the important features that we've been able to link to dinosaurs. So in Jurassic Park, in the, I think, first 10 minutes of Jurassic Park, when Sam Neill is digging up Deinonychus out in the Badlands, he's, they take the scan, the ground scan of the skeleton. Something I'm asked about constantly. That doesn't work in the field. We've never done that. It's good for big structures. You can't do it for dinosaur bones. But he points and he's like, oh, it's got a semi-lunate wrist bone, which is correct. Good Jurassic Park. This is a bone of the wrist that's important in the flight stroke in birds, but we know shows up earlier in dinosaurs. Less publicized is the pisiform, which is an additional bone of the wrist. Here is a beautiful little chicken arm. The pisiform is in red. And this bone is important in flying birds in helping to stabilize the wing during flight and in maintaining the flight stroke. It's closely associated with flight. In fact, in birds that don't fly, a lot of flightless birds, it's reduced to kind of a little orb. Traditionally, the story of the evolution of this pisiform is that it is present in very early meat-eating dinosaurs as well as crocodilians, but it's on the side of the arm, which is where we see it in crocs and where we find it in things like Coelophysis. But then this bone is lost in most meat-eating dinosaurs. It's either not ossifying, so it's cartilaginous, or it doesn't form at all, which can sometimes happen. It's a bone that usually forms in a ligament, so maybe that ligament is lost. Then we catch the pisiform again in birds, things like Sapiornis, which is, if you looked at it, you would go, that's a bird. So that's the traditional story. About 4 years ago, my friend James and I, we were working separately. He was working at the American Museum in New York. I was working here, and we were working on two new dinosaurs, neither of which have been named or described yet, but that is the pace of science. They're coming out. They're almost ready. But as we were working on them, we had taken CT scans of their skeletons, and we were separating the bones using digital software. And I found a little bone in the wrist that I didn't recognize because my reading had been, hey, they're not supposed to have an extra bone. At the same time, he was looking at another dinosaur from a similar site in Mongolia, and he said, hey, I saw that last week. I think it's a pisiform, which was very exciting because they're not supposed to be present in most meat-eating dinosaurs. So the wrist I was working on was this troodontid. These are meat-eating dinosaurs, relatively closely related to birds. The animal that I was studying is about the size of Deinonychus, so wolf-sized, if a little bigger. But we have the pisiform here in red. And what's particularly exciting is that it's in the wrist complex, not on the side of the arm. So this suggests that this bone that is assumed to be quite important for flight is showing up potentially before birds. The other species is this fantastically grotesque animal, Psittapati. It's an oviraptorosaur, and it's also present in red, although a little smaller. Pardon me. So this discovery pushes the origin of that specialized bone for flight down the tree quite a bit. So it's showing up, at least in this group we call Maniraptoriforms. These include things like ostrich mimic dinosaurs, as well as most of the other bird-like dinosaurs. and then it's moving from the side of the arm into the wrist, which is what is believed to be its position for flight in Peniraptorans. These are Oviraptorosaurs, Troodontids, and raptor dinosaurs. So, okay, it shows up a little earlier than we think. That's kind of cool, I guess. So what? Well, I'm glad I asked this rhetorical question to an audience that is muted, so they can't ask anything else. Maybe. All right. So these animals that I've shown you, these troodontids, these oviraptors, these are big animals. They're not flying. Their arms are short. Their flight feathers are relatively reduced, but they're present on the arm. And for a long time, when we were studying the origin of flight in dinosaurs, it's been assumed, or it's popular to think, that flight is evolving from animals like this that are evolving to flap and then eventually take off. And that could still be true. But the fun fly in the ointment is that recently we have found early members of all of these groups, and they tend to have longer arms with longer feathers. So this is Anchiornis. For dromaeosaurs, we have these earlier microraptorines, which even have feathers on their legs. And controversially, for oviraptorosaurs, there's a group of bizarre bat-winged animals called Scanceriopterids. They're flying differently. We're not totally sure what's going on there, but maybe early members of this group had flight as well. So perhaps the story here is not that these big dinosaurs, these relatively large dinosaurs, things like Velociraptor, this Troodontid, and that Oviraptorosaur are on the way, but they are actually secondarily flightless. And maybe flight is evolving a little farther down the tree in dinosaurs than we thought. These are all small-bodied animals. And I think my personal hypothesis is that as we get a better early record of these things from the Middle Jurassic, we're going to find more and more features we assumed were just bird features, and possibly more evidence of early flight. And this is it kind of rhymes. This is a funny hypothesis to come around to, because as a student of vertebrate paleontology and of the time I went to school, this was a popular argument of a group called bandits. Birds are not dinosaurs, and they would say, "Oh, all those fantastic dinosaur fossils with feathers, they're just secondarily flightless birds." So it feels weird to come around and be like, "Well, they're secondarily flightless, but they're still dinosaurs." But this is an open hypothesis. We definitely need more information to know for sure, but it's very exciting. There's a paleontologist at Chicago. Her name is Jingmei O'Connor, and she's worked on early birds quite a bit. And she finds evidence in the number of feathers they have on their arms, which are quite high. That is also something that happens in flightless birds. In flying birds, there's usually a fixed set of numbers on how many big feathers you can have on your arms, pennaceous feathers. But in flightless birds, that constraint is relaxed, so they get more feathers on the forelimbs, which is something we see in these small dromaeosaurs and stuff like that. So that is just a quick little tour through dinosaur wrists and some of the more exciting implications of it. That's all I got for you guys. So if you have any questions, I am delighted to answer them. I can hang out for a while too. I'm not in any rush. At some point, I'll grab some dinner for myself. But beyond that, thanks so much for listening. That's all I got.
Alex, that's wonderful. Before you take down the PowerPoint, can you pull up the was it the Ankylosaurus?
The Anchiornis, yes.
Pull up the Ankylosaurus again. Okay. Somebody on the Zoom today, Rebecca, drew this.
Oh yeah, yes, for the paper in 2017, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes, and I think this was the basis for the life on our planet reconstruction of Anchiornis as well.
I kind of wondered if it was.
I mean, Anjin has said to me explicitly that it is.
Seriously? Oh,
Yes.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so you can, I don't know, use that in next time you talk about influence.
Oh, I definitely will.
Cool. Yeah, you know what? That's so funny. I think I recognized your name and I was like, why does that ring a bell? Because I think I've had to include you in other talks where I list the author. I put together the wrist thing in like 2 seconds. Otherwise,
Oh,
I would
that
have
is so
properly
funny.
attributed you.
Oh,
Yeah.
very cool. Well, I love to do a feathery dinosaur.
It looks great. I love it.
Thanks.
I tell you that one with the feathers on the legs that look just like the wings. It makes it look like it's got four wings. That thing is terrifying looking.
Well, so Anchiornis actually has a bit of it as well. They have these long feathers on the back of the wings. In this nice little
Yes.
Microraptor, it kind of looks like a biblically accurate angel, but they're quite small.
Well, the thing is, when it's flying at you, I would bet
Seems big.
it's a little bit visually confusing. Like, is the bitey head up top or is the bitey head below and it's upside down? I could see
Well, there's
that could be confusing to prey.
the four-winged protobird. This is actually quite cool, and I regret not having put it in a slide. But in the 1920s, before that, in the 1910s, when there were these early hypotheses about the origin of flight in birds, a famous paleo artist, and I can't remember his name, but he did an illustration of kind of like a feathered dinosaur lizard looking like animal with wings on its fore and hind limbs. He's like, yeah, it's possible that the ancestral bird could have had feathers on its hind limbs, maybe to help stabilize. And then lo and behold, 75 years later, someone splits open a piece of slate in China, and you have Microraptor, which has feathers on its fore and hind limbs, which is pretty cool, right? I mean, he wasn't alive, which is a shame, but to be vindicated in such a way is pretty neat.
That is very cool. Very cool.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just saw today a preprint on a supposed dinosaur that has feathered hind limbs, which is super cool.
Yes, it is, and it has short forelimbs
Yeah,
with feathers,
so weird.
which leans into the camp of secondarily flightless for the group. Because, right, why would you evolve hind limb feathers to not fly? So
Yeah.
it's pretty neat. Yeah, that was hot off the presses. I got in not an argument. I was in a Twitter discussion earlier about which direction flight was evolving with another paleontologist. But yeah, very cool. That's the author on that, Xu Xing. He's like, as far as living paleontologist goes, possibly the most important. He's the guy behind all these feathered dinosaur fossils. You don't want to say the most important, but definitely like a giant in the field.
All right, why don't we take the stop
Yeah, of course.
questions? I'm gonna start off with an air sac question.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Yeah.
Happy to. All righty. Cool.
We heard recently, I think it was like last month's talk, how mammals, we take oxygen in on the in-stroke, and then we release carbon dioxide. So it's oxygen in, carbon dioxide out, never the twain shall meet. My understanding with the air sacs, so first of all, they seem like auxiliary storage tanks for both oxygen and carbon dioxide. So the caudal ones are the oxygen and the cranial are the carbon dioxide. But we've heard about how avian respiration is so efficient because they have bidirectional intake of oxygen. We are one direction. Oxygen only, we only take oxygen on the in-stroke. But so my understanding, looking at your talk, it sounds like oxygen comes into the lungs and then some of it peels off to the air sacs, the caudal ones, which are below. And then when they breathe out, some of that oxygen that oxygen comes from the caudal air sacs back into the lungs. And so that's how they get oxygen in both directions, which brings them more oxygen than we do, which again is considered one of the prerequisites for flight, and that they're so much more efficient on their intake of oxygen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is that's correct. That you've perfectly. There is a little flexibility in which air sacs do which sometimes, but there are those that are kind of receiving and those that are releasing stale air. Sometimes There's a woman, Emma Shackner, I mentioned her before. She's scanning every bird she can get her hands on, and she's finding, oh, okay. And she's finding that sometimes the lung itself is doing a lot of this too. Like they have expanded lungs and air sacs. There's some flexibility, but your summary of the air sac function is correct. That's how it's working.
Okay, I never really understood that till I saw this tonight. So basically, these are just like spare tanks. Like
Yes.
you carried extra gasoline tank in your car. So we have these extra tanks to store some extra oxygen and store extra CO2 to go out. And that's how we get this two-way airflow. I never really understood that till I saw your animations tonight. So that's really cool. One thing we get with birds, and probably a lot of you on this, anyone who's had birds, have been around birds, has seen this. Occasionally you'll get a bird that develops what's called subcutaneous emphysema. So they've had ruptures of one or more air sacs. And so they get like these big balloon structures.
Mhm.
And they do fine, generally, as long as they don't get infected. You have to be very careful with them. I understand that you can deflate these with a needle. The vet can do that, but they sometimes that's all you need to do. You have to just serially deflate them under sterile conditions. It's like a
Mhm.
blister on your foot. You don't want to just jab it
Right.
because then it may get infected. Same thing with these air sacs. So sometimes they will just get better over time. Other times, I've seen birds like this in our club in years past where they just have like multiple bulges, and it just keeps reaccumulating and coming back. And so these air sacs are very delicate. And I also understand, so when a bird smacks into your window and dies, most common reason is, or for immediate death, is because of a head injury. People think they broke the neck because they see the neck twisted. Bird necks can twist a lot more than ours can, so
Mhm.
that's not what's killing them. They're actually dying from concussion, brain bleeds, things like that. But some birds get up, fly away. You don't see what happens to them; they're long gone. But my understanding is some of them die later on because these air sacs rupture. So when they see
Mhm.
the window, as you mentioned, these air sacs are so delicate that the blunt force of hitting something without even, not even like a cat puncturing it, but just the blunt force of hitting something ruptures the air sacs, and then they get infected, they have trouble breathing, and they die. And that kind of begs the question. And I know in evolution, everything is a trade-off. You get something good, you also get something bad. So these air sacs give birds more oxygen. They're pretty much, I think we can say, a requirement for flight. I mean, I guess it's no question in the evolutionary record, but pretty much every bird nowadays that flies with air sacs, and they're thought to be a necessary component of flying. They need the extra. Well, you talk about that, whether or not they really need that extra option. So it's kind of up to debate. But on the other hand, these air sacs are delicate. So whereas we could smack into a wall and our lungs are protected by our rib cage, nothing's going to happen to them. If a bird smacks into something, they can pop these air sacs and damage them. So it helps them with flight and oxygenation, but it also makes them more likely to be hurt. So that's kind of you need
Yes.
light, airy things to be able to fly, but light, airy things are also more dangerous to your survival. So you think
Yeah.
about fair summary of
I think that's a very fair summary. Yeah. Oh, we have a hand.
there you go, Renee, or Mimi, whoever.
First, Mimi. Okay, yeah, me. Yeah.
Hi. By
Howdy.
the way, I was on your tour, your tour.
Me too.
That's one of
I
the highlights of my whole life. I've been a dinosaur freak since I was 6. So
oh,
thank
I'm
you.
so glad. Thank you.
One of the highlights of my life.
Mm.
So one of the other things with the birds, I mean, maybe it's obvious, I'm not very familiar. I mean, I've heard about the air sacs. Where does the exhaust go? Where does the CO2 go? How does it exit the bird?
It passes through sometimes, and I've only seen a few dissections, it goes from that cranial air sac or an equivalent of it, and it kind of, there's this not dead space, but there's a functional space before the lung that goes up the trachea. So they're exhaling, right? A
Oh.
bird does breathe out. They
But
breathe
it's not
in.
exhaling from the lungs specifically. It's exhaling from something else.
It's exhaling mostly from the stale air that's stored in those air sacs. Sometimes there can be extra stale air in the lung, but the exhale is coming from two places. And when they're exhaling, that extra tube in the back is putting, with the extra sac in the back, is putting more oxygen in the lung. But they're exhaling similar to how we would. They're still expelling stale air up and out their mouth.
Okay.
It's actually a pretty normal way, right? Birds, one of the major ways birds cool down is rapid exhalation, right? It's called gular fluttering, but they move air rapidly that way. Yes.
So when they look like they're panting, like a stressed bird, sometimes, has the beak open, and is that what you're
Yes.
talking about?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, so the other thing is with the fighting, like you said, with the chickens, so you've got that orientation where they're really very well pointed away from their air sacs, and the legs are so forward. Is that like more? And I've seen that with chickens a lot, because me having been around chickens, doing that sort of, like protecting themselves.
Mhm.
But is that like a very prevalent thing? I mean, I don't know that I've seen that. Is that with a lot of birds? I mean, like waterfowl, would you see something like that too? Or
I've never seen waterfowl fight in the same way. It's not uncommon in raptorial bird, like birds of prey
okay,
in
okay,
midair will do it.
okay.
And flightless birds, so other chicken
Mhm.
relatives, galliforms, but also
Mhm.
I think a few of the ratites as well. The trick is interpreting, obviously they're keeping their bodies away from harm, which is a normal enough thing to do when animals fight. But mammals, when we are like preying on something, we really grapple, right? Like, you ever seen a lion or a tiger, they are just wrapping themselves around it, trying to get a bite at the neck while staying out of harm's way. Birds, when they're preying, are feet only. There are the Seriema, like those stalking
Mm.
birds that just kick snakes to death, right? It's
Oh, right.
all very distant from the sensitive core. It might be also a balance thing, right? A lot of birds have to kind of rear back to kick because of their center of gravity. Like I said, the extrapolation to dinosaurs is more of maybe it's just pattern recognition, be hard to write a paper about. But I thought maybe, and it's a fun little thing to keep in mind too.
Mm.
But it goes beyond chickens, I can say with confidence. If it happened, there are no other fossils like that fossil I showed. So whether there's any evidence of it in any other dinosaurs is purely speculation. But hey, at least we have that one dinosaur, that one velociraptor, what a
Yeah.
fossil.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely interesting to think about if it's true, because, now I can kind of picture a lot of birds that fight. When you see all these pictures of birds in the air that are fighting and grappling. And now, going back in my mind, it does seem like they're always trying to keep their chest away. But I always assume just because, this is the end that's doing something.
Right. Yeah, the feet. Or in sometimes, very rarely, I guess, the beaks. Yeah, so look, possibly. I will, I'm gonna cage that section in a big possibly. But it's just a fun little thing to keep in mind.
You said at the very beginning that a lot of reptiles don't have air sacs.
Yes.
Mentioned turtles and all that, and that's kind of interesting. I guess I always kind of assumed that the reptiles had a similar respiratory system as the birds,
No.
which of course again lends credence to what you're saying is, which is I guess a little controversial, whether you need the air sacs to fly them because the reptiles aren't flying. I
Yeah.
guess, one of the things you're always seeing this on the internet, but I guess it is actually true in some turtle species. It's one of these sort of gag things you're always hearing about. Turtles can breathe through their butts, but it turns out there are some turtles who actually can breathe
Yes, they have gas exchanging tissue
Yes.
in the cloaca. So breathing in other reptile groups is actually, so lizards and snakes, they pump their lungs, right? The motion, our diaphragm, the bird sternum, all that's doing is deforming the lung to create negative space, so air goes in. So in lizards and snakes, they do this with their ribs. So they will breathe by changing the orientation of their ribs. And this is actually why it's possible to run a lizard down in an open area, because those same muscles on their ribs are what they're using to run. They swing their bodies back and forth. So they can run really fast for a short little while, then they got to stop and breathe, and then they got to go again.
So that's why you always see them run, stop, run, stop.
Yes, exactly.
That's crazy.
Turtles,
Same muscles are used for breathing and for running. So you can't
yes,
both at the same time.
it's pretty. And snakes only have one lung. They're bizarre. Most snakes only have one lung. There are a few primitive ones that have two lobes, but all their body muscles are used for slithering. So they can move quickly for a little while if they need to, but they're usually ambush, sit and wait predators. Turtles are the real weirdos because turtle ribs are fused into the shell, so they can't move them to breathe. So they have something a little bit more like an alligator and a mammal, a kind of diaphragm that pulls the lung back inside the shell. But that's evolving very early. We have turtles in the fossil record that like have half of a shell, like some motion in the ribs and stuff like that from the Triassic period. But you really can't, it has to be in place before you get the whole shell, or otherwise the animal doesn't really work.
So do you think that is convergent evolution where
Yes.
and the mammals both develop this diaphragmatic breathing separately?
Yeah, well, that's a bit of an open question. The assumption is the primitive condition for animals on land, amniotes, is probably what we call buccal pumping. This is what amphibians do, where they are literally swallowing the air. They just go gulp and push it down. And some salamanders don't have lungs, and they just absorb oxygen through their skin. Some of the really little ones, they're called pleurodonts, they're plethodontids, very cute. But once you get into animals, terrestrial animals, mammals and reptiles, there is some uncertainty, right? Because you have these diaphragms in all these different reptile groups, and you have them in mammals. So maybe they're inherited, but early mammals don't seem to, I mean, very early mammal relatives before they have hair or anything like that, don't seem like they have them. And they're also a really tricky structure to lose. The diaphragm muscle in mammals totally is actually developmentally linked quite closely to the number of neck vertebrae you have. So almost all mammals have the same number of cervical vertebrae. Does anyone know what number that is?
7.
Yes, very good. There are two exceptions in like all of mammalia for this. One are sloths, and I think one are sea cows and dugongs, and they have a few more, if I remember correctly. And how that relates to their breathing, I couldn't tell you, but generally it's believed that the diaphragm is very closely linked to early development stuff, so it's hard to lose. So in the case of alligators, something similar is probably happening later in their evolution. We don't really have a great idea for how early crocodiles are pumping their lungs. It's thought to be kind of more like lizards with the ribs until you get this little projection on one of these hip bones that we know is where this muscle is attaching. But before that, not totally sure. Turtles, again, before that, not totally sure. Turtles are a source of endless mystery.
It's so interesting. Yes, for people on this talk that don't have birds, or even for our people with birds who don't realize this, it's one of the things you learn very early on when you have birds is never to totally grab them around their body. You can partially grab their body, but you never want to totally encircle them because they can suffocate. With humans, we have the diaphragm that pulls down, but birds have to be able to expand outward. So if you put your hands around the bird and they can't expand their ribcage outward, they can't breathe. So I'm sure some people have learned that the hard way, but you have to be super careful when you hold a bird that you leave room for them to expand their rib cage to breathe. And I won't ask you here who knew that and doesn't know that, but yeah, it's just important information. Yeah, it's so interesting how all these different breathing systems evolve. I was thinking that our breathing system kind of sucks because we don't have bidirectional breathing, but on the other hand, we don't have air sacs that can tear. So that's the trade-off.
Yeah. No, mammal breathing's pretty good. We are, we're doing all right now, our time in the sun, so to speak.
For now.
For now. Yeah, nothing lasts forever. That's the nature of things.
So the next extinction, which some people say is happening right now, so the Anthropocene. So all right, do we have other questions?
Yeah.
Speak up or raise your hand or just shout out or type in the chat. We had one of our members ask if Rebecca would give us a talk about the process of illustrating these ancient birds and dinosaurians, and she'd agree. So I think that's a great.
Cool.
We'd love to see, because it's so interesting. It's not like you just sit down and draw something. You have to assemble the scientific information, and then how do you decide? There's so many choices to make. I remember quite a while ago, probably a lot of you have seen this. We know what a hippopotamus looks like, but if people just had hippopotamus bones, what would they think it looked like? And just drawing from the fossil record with no other information, and they did this, and people came up with the weirdest looking hippos that looked absolutely nothing like our hippos. But given that they didn't have any other information than we have on these ancient creatures, it just shows you how very wrong we undoubtedly are about these. I'm sure if someone had a time machine, we could go back like 5 minutes and go, oh, that's what it looked like. We just make all the difference. And even the dodo, which went extinct just a few hundred years ago, but before photographs, and there weren't many illustrations. And even that, we had dodos totally wrong, and they went extinct, just a few hundred years ago. So you imagine about these ancient creatures that no human being has ever seen or reported, and they could just look phenomenally different than we think they do. So I think that would be a great talk to hear about how you go about make these decisions, what to put in the illustration, and how
I think it's super interesting. I know I'm a little bit biased, but yeah, it's very fun.
I said we have two dinosaurian illustrators. Well, actually, Rebecca's not technically in the club, but another club member who illustrates dinosaurians. So it would be really interesting to see. Renee, you have a question?
I wanted to share a book. We were talking about the shrink wrapping of dinosaurs,
Shrink wrapping.
and there's a book
That's
called
a really good term for it, shrink wrapping.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
yesterday's.
yeah.
Oh, Yesterday's, one of my favorite books. This shows dinosaurs up in trees.
Oh,
what's the one on the back? That's
This
kind of
is a
creepy.
baboon. This is a baboon done with the shrink wrap method. See how totally alien it looks?
God.
Love all yesterdays.
Oh, Yesterday's.
Yesterday.
Not cheap. It's a very, wait a minute, there's one more picture that I really want to show you.
That's a great term. That's the thing.
Brontosaurus.
Make them very. Oh, look at that.
Oh, that's
stubby
great.
one. I just thought it was really interesting because it took I'm 73, so I saw the shrink wrap dinosaurs. That's what I had to grow up with. My first dinosaurs were like that, my plastic ones. Here's a wild looking triceratops. Well, triceratops relative.
Look,
Oh, cool.
That's
So
wild.
All Yesterdays by John Conway, C.M. Kozman, and Darren Naish.
Oh yeah, I know Darren.
Yeah, I
So
mean, we're just learning about feathers now, which was inconceivable when most of us were growing up. But we still know nothing about soft tissue.
yeah,
So
so it really is wonderful when it challenges a lot of this, at least the stuff I grew up with.
so um, Darren Naish was also the uh, scientific advisor for Prehistoric Planet on Apple TV. So I think they don't do a lot of very speculative stuff in that show, but kind of similar ethos. They try to show interesting and maybe unexpected behaviors and stuff like that. No,
And
there was a bizarre iguanodontian that was discovered just 2 months ago called Howlong that has tiny little porcupine quills all over its skin that we're not sure if they're really feathers or
Yeah.
some kind of weird scale. So there's all, yeah, I mean, there's the conservative approach to reconstruction I mean, my philosophy about it is simultaneously like more, less wrong about the skeletal anatomy, but almost assuredly more wrong about the soft tissue.
Oh,
Right. Every time a decent fossil is preserved, you get things you would be like, whoa, heterodinosaurs have gigantic feathers on their tails, or, you know, all these different bird-like dinosaurs have all sorts of weird feathers never seen before. Uh, you know, all sorts of fun stuff. Spinosaurus, whatever Spinosaurus is doing, had something of related to the water, pretty cool. We're
yeah.
always surprised. That's the fun part.
And we're just
Yeah.
trying to learn a little bit about colors, but we grew up at a time where dinosaurs were all sort of
Gray.
great.
pewter gray, and they were all scaly, and again, no real soft tissue. And now we know they have feathers, we know they have colors, but you just imagine going back then and seeing what it actually looked like. I mean,
I would like to very badly.
Me too.
And the sounds, I mean, yeah, that would be really interesting to, because I mean, in all the old things, they were always roaring, right? Is that necessarily really what they sounded like?
Did they
Right.
have sphinxes?
Did they have shrinks? Could they have been singing?
No. We do have really nice preservation of
Mm.
some dinosaurs that have like large larynx, so they were vocal. I don't think we found a syrinx in a dinosaur yet. We
Okay.
found them in extinct birds, things like Vagavis, actually, which is kind of this really early, maybe relative of ducks and stuff.
Yep.
But there was, I think, a little while ago, some discussion of the ability of dinosaurs to vocalize with their mouths open. And there was a rather severe position taken by some scientists, which was like, no, they wouldn't. Most animals don't. They listen to high frequency sound, and they're like, crocodiles don't, which wasn't true. I don't know where it came out of because crocodiles open mouth vocalize a lot.
They roar?
They bark, they
Okay.
hiss. Big male Nile crocodiles might as well roar. Just go on YouTube and look for some videos of like crocodile and alligator sounds. I don't know if they would make sounds like, a lion's roar or anything like that. It's almost impossible to know. Um,
well,
but we did say that about feather colors, so maybe someone will figure something out.
I mean, I just, it always kills me in Jurassic Park. So you're being chased by the giant raptor, but then it stops and it roars, and it stops and it roars. No, if it wants to eat you, it's just gonna go grab you and eat you. It's not gonna stop and roar. I mean, what would be the purpose of the roar? It's not afraid of you. It doesn't want to mate with you. It wants to eat you. So it's just going to go and grab you and eat you. And of course, then the movie would be over in 10 minutes, but
Right. No one wants to watch Sam Neill get eaten.
no.
I don't. I love Sam Neill. It's also why Jaws is the superior film, which I know as a dinosaur person is hard for me to say, but I think it might be his best movie. I just rewatched it again. I got a pack of Narragansetts because in the summer they do the Narragansett cans that are like from Jaws with the yellow and red. I said, let's watch Jaws again. And I love them. I love Jurassic Park too, but Jaws is a special place.
Definitely. All right, do we have any more questions? Not, I want to thank everyone for coming and have a nice summer. If you're local, please come to our field trip and our picnic. And I'm going to stop the recording.